A Batman villain needs a solid hook to their character if they ever hope to stand out and stick with readers. While Hush's trench coat and bandaged head draws you in and makes you want to learn more about him, he really didn't have much behind his tactics and motivations, especially not in any of his appearances shortly after his original debut. But along came writer Paul Dini to scoop up the character's ashes in 2008 and create a few diamonds. Dini is best known for being one of the lead writers on several DC Animated Universe cartoons such as Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, and Batman Beyond, which he also co-created. He's credited as co-creating the character Harley Quinn, and he also wrote the stories for both Arkham Asylum and City, which I think do a great job juggling a large amount of Batman's villains. Episodes Dini wrote include things like Heart of Ice, which is credited for completely reinventing the character of Mr. Freeze, giving him a much more tragic backstory and motivation. Now, Dini had nothing to do with the creation of Hush, but he seemed to take a particular liking to him, featuring the character in 3 different storylines revolving around him, as well as giving him a pretty awesome side mission in Arkham City. Similar to that Mr. Freeze episode, the first storyline he wrote for Hush was called Heart of Hush, but the heart in question here actually has a more literal inclusion. The last time we really saw Hush was a few years earlier in the pages of Gotham Knights, a comic that was cancelled on a cliffhanger. There was a Man-Bat series that he starred in which technically came out right after, but not much came of that anyway. We talked about all of this stuff in the last video, so check that out if you want to know more about how this character was in dire straits, being put in numerous poorly conceived plots that didn't fit him. Joker returns to Gotham after Hush beat him up in the streets, and as revenge, he captures Hush and places a pacemaker in his heart. This lets Joker mess with Hush and cause a heart attack in him with the push of a button. The story was cancelled just as Hush was begging Batman for help, and Joker arrived to cause him more pain. That's a pretty funny place to leave this character, and like I said in my last video, as much as I would have liked for all of this to be ignored, Paul Dini addresses it directly, with a flashback that surprisingly even shows Hush in that terrible redesign. Hush explains that he tackled Joker off the roof and wrestled the button from his hand. In an effort to remove the pacemaker, he learned everything there was to know about the human heart, and then put that knowledge to good use in a new scheme. The story starts with Hush, real name Thomas Elliot, watching Batman and Catwoman on a normal night of stopping crime. His binoculars are now a solid red, which looks really good alongside the hard shadows used throughout this story. He's watching from the top of a hospital he just purchased and is renovating. He brings in a homeless guy he finds outside, and it's revealed everyone who works there is a sedated, zombie-like servant of his. He injects the guy with a syringe, knocking him out and adding him to his flock. Hush asks not to be disturbed, and he goes into his office and begins marking his face with dotted lines. Then he begins cutting, reminiscing about his failure to beat Bruce as well as their childhood together. His backstory is massively expanded upon here, which does a lot to legitimize his actions beyond just being a spoiled rich kid. In his eyes, his parents were evil monsters, his mother being emotionally abusive and his father being physically abusive. His mom was obsessed with proving she and her son were worthy of carrying the Elliot name, so she would constantly compare him to Bruce, making him feel inadequate. She's the one who pounded all of those Aristotle quotes into his head, and his father's frequent beatings caused him to constantly think several steps ahead of him, justifying why he was so good at the strategy game he and Bruce played together. Being an alcoholic also contributed to the car crash that killed him, though that was obviously mostly due to Tommy cutting their brakes one rainy night. Tommy saw this as a form of self-preservation and vowed he'd never forgive Bruce and his father for keeping his mother alive. Tommy played the role of the concerned son to dull suspicions that he was involved in the crash, which also keeps him from trying anything like that again. He sees his mom with her head bandaged after the accident, likely inspiring him to don the same look later in his life. She gives him the jade pendant we saw in the original story, explaining that the pain will pass and the good times will come around like a circle. This scene is meant to have a cruel irony to it, since he finds the words of Aristotle to be taunting him, and was hoping the good times would come with the death of his parents behind him. After completing his surgery, he wraps his head and appears before Batman and Catwoman, who are putting a stop to a villain named Dr. Aesop, who reads from a book of Aesop's fables as his gimmick. Hush shoots him through said book and says he prefers Aristotle, and lets Batman know he's the only one that's gonna end his life. Batman cuts his face with a batarang, but Hush says it's too soon to spoil the surprise and disappears. When the next issue begins, we catch up with Batman hunting him down, and they get into a fight, ending with Hush shooting him twice in the back of the neck. Later, it's revealed that this is one of his drugged workers, perhaps the homeless guy from earlier, who Hush dressed up as Batman to train against. It brings him joy to see Batman's body in a pool of his own blood, something he sharpens his abilities every night to achieve for real. He thinks back to a time when his mom allowed him to go to camp with Bruce for a few weeks, only to show up a few days in and demand he leave. She was so overprotective that it was smothering, and all of his free time was spent caring for her. This was his one chance to be a normal kid, and instead everyone was snickering at him, causing him to snap and hit another kid in the mouth with a paddle. This gets him placed in a padded cell for the rest of the summer, diagnosed with anger issues. Though he starts to build the wall in his mind, blaming Bruce and his family for setting that whole situation up to embarrass him. He finds himself under the care of Dr. Crane, who would go on to become the Scarecrow. And we'll soon see Crane became a mentor of sorts for Tommy later in life, and chooses to sign his release papers, hoping he'll continue creating chaos. Instead of Tommy being jealous of Bruce getting a fortune from his parents' death, it's recontextualized as gaining freedom, something Tommy doesn't have as his life revolves increasingly around taking care of his mother. He's partially to blame for his own circumstances, disfiguring his mom and putting her in a wheelchair. But she also developed cancer, essentially making him her stay-at-home nurse. We cut back to the modern day where Hush is monitoring Selina, aka Catwoman, from the rooftops. Branching off of the romance set up in the original Hush storyline, Selina is chatting about her feelings for Bruce with another hero named Zatanna. She's been a character since the 1960s, someone with reality-bending magical powers who Paul Dini often likes to write stories for. She's more relevant later, but is established as someone who knew Bruce when they were both kids. When Hush spots her, he recognizes her from his childhood and has apparently hated her ever since, calling her a creepy little freak among other things. This prejudice was apparently inherited from his mother, who also disliked seeing those who she called carnies hanging around high society where she felt they didn't belong. It's interesting to see Hush show attitudes like this that feel believably inherited from his affluent upbringing, and elements like this do a great job tying him to his origin more than his characterization in Gotham Knights and even the original Hush arc. Earlier in the story, Hush got a letter from Dr. Crane stating he's standing by waiting for the next phase of his plan. They call each other mentor and pupil, implying they've kept in contact ever since they first met. Tying Hush into other existing villains at an earlier point in his life makes him feel like less of an outsider or late addition to the universe. Their plan involves having Scarecrow kidnap a kid with psychological troubles and baiting Batman to come and save him. There, they inject the kid with venom, temporarily turning him into a hulking beast. It's interesting that Hush would so easily put a kid in danger, since here he's portrayed as someone who's still a kid behind all those bandages, never being able to move on from his past. While Batman's busy with that, Hush pays a visit to Selina by appearing behind her in her home. It's always nice to see Hush actually whispering and living up to his name. She immediately kicks him out a window and the two of them land and start fighting. But when she rips off his bandages, what she sees surprises her long enough for Hush to stab her through the stomach with a karambit. He takes her to the hospital and begins to operate on her. We get another view of Bruce and Tommy when they were both young adults. Bruce had been traveling the world for education, but came back to Gotham for a visit. Tommy's mom heaps praise onto Bruce, but makes subtle jabs towards Tommy by rubbing it in that he has to stay home and take care of her. Apparently, she refuses to hire a caretaker, forcing Tommy to be with her. And she also controls all of the family's money, not letting Tommy use any of it. The one thing keeping him going is that she agreed to eventually let him go to medical school, and he can't do anything to jeopardize that. At the same party, Tommy meets a woman named Peyton Riley, who can see in his eyes that that he's a trapped animal. They begin to hit it off, but you can already see his mom doesn't approve since she's the daughter of a mob boss. Back in the present, Batman has dealt with Scarecrow and the kid and gets a call from Oracle informing him of Selina's location. They say she was in the back of an ambulance which pulled up to a hospital full of equipment. Everything was offloaded by the medical staff, so when Batman arrives to the emergency room, he finds her laid out surrounded by unknown machines with pumps attached to the inside of her chest in place of her heart, which is now missing. Knowing Batman had an affinity for her, Hush surgically removed her heart, and hooked her up to this new form of life support to bait Batman into finding him. Batman immediately goes to beat Hush's location out of Scarecrow, who eventually spits it out. Knowing Hush might have a kill switch on him to shut the machine off, he goes to confront him alone. Hush prepares himself, redressing the wounds on his face from his operation earlier. Ironically, he believes Batman is the one who's still a kid deep down, lashing out at the world. They're both still dealing with trauma from their childhoods, which makes Hush a more interesting reflection of Batman than when he was originally introduced. Credit to Paul Dini for bringing back the way Hush ties Aristotle quotes to the current situation. It isn't the strongest gimmick, but it makes him feel more like a scholar than a brute, which is how he was portrayed in Gotham Knights. Before they clash, we jump back in time and see the relationship with his mother begin to sour. It begins with the news that her cancer is in remission, meaning she's on the path to recovery. For some reason, she's in denial and claims she still needs him, blaming the girl he met for trying to steal him away. She says Bruce would have never been caught dating a criminal's daughter, which causes him to snap at her for the first time, calling Bruce an arrogant moron. He points out that his dad would constantly drink and beat him, but she was too scared to stop him at the risk of losing the opulent life she'd grown accustomed to. He storms off, leaving her crying, and goes to meet up with Peyton. There, he contemplates running away together, and she says she loves him enough to do it, but doesn't want him to give up medical school. We see him scrounge together a few wrinkled $1 bills to pay for lunch, showing us how little connection he has to the fortune his mother protects. Peyton suggests she talks to her, and Tommy reluctantly agrees. Hush's trip down memory lane is interrupted by one of his employees saying they've got signs of Batman, but as they lead him there, he realizes one of them is Batman in disguise, and the two of them tumble over a railing. Hush gets Batman to stop his assault by claiming he'll never recover Selina's heart if he dies. Turns out this is the same hospital Hush's parents wound up in after their car crash, making it another significant location for them to do battle, similar to how they previously fought on the bridge where the crash happened. Now that he's turned this place into his lair, he shows Batman the best part: a cryogenic freezer with Selina's heart hooked up in the middle of it, preserved perfectly. Even Hush has to laugh at the symbolism of the situation, with Batman needing to recapture the heart of the woman he loves deep down. He states Scarecrow got him in contact with Mr. Freeze, who he paid to help design the two machines that made this plan possible. Earlier, it was stated these machines are far beyond modern science, something they could have won the Nobel Prize for. Hush and Mr. Freeze teaming up just feels right, and once again, credit should go to Paul Dini for elevating the character of Mr. Freeze in Heart of Ice, and now passing the torch and doing the same thing here for a different character in Heart of Hush. This whole scheme is far more poetic and cunning than what he's done previously, which fits more for a character like this who is so introspective and waits for the right time to strike. In a similar vein, Batman begins coughing and losing his balance. Turns out the gas in the room was designed to knock him out when combined with a compound Hush left on the boy from earlier. He knew he'd be defenseless if he brought him here and just waited for it to take effect. Now comes the big surprise Hush was talking about at the beginning of the story. Surrounded by enemies with no way to fight back, he looks up to see Hush has surgically altered his own face to mimic Bruce Wayne's. He welcomes him to the other side of the mirror, which is a pretty sick line. He outlines what he plans on doing with this new face, including putting a bullet in the head of Alfred, Dick Grayson, and Tim Drake, since he only needs to fool them for a moment to kill them. Then he plans on having Bruce step down from his various positions and disappearing from the public eye. The real Bruce Wayne's body will be found a few days later, too disfigured to identify. He wants to watch as Bruce and Selina's hearts stop and die together, knowing he killed them on a physical and spiritual level. The final issue of the storyline begins with a slight fake-out where Hush breaks into Wayne Manor, masquerading as Bruce who needs to get to the Batcave. Of course, you can tell he's wearing Hush's trench coat and gloves, which should let you see through the disguise. Alfred suddenly attacks him and knocks his gun out of his hand, already knowing it was really Hush. Turns out Batman had already called to let him know Hush was headed there with an altered face, giving away the charade instantly. But Hush is still able to subdue him with a stab and deduce the location of the Batcave's entrance. Now, I think having Hush turn his face into Bruce's is a great concept that fits with Hush's mindset, as well as his bandaged up design. It's built up really nicely, but I don't think they apply it well in this story. Learning that his cover was blown before he even got to use it on a single person is so deflating. I would have liked to see if any of these people close to Bruce could have figured it out on their own before they were attacked. Sure, the sight of the face surprised Selina earlier, but it wasn't meant to trick her, and he was openly attacking her as Hush. I called it a fake out since in the last issue, Hush was saying he was gonna watch Batman die before leaving for the manor. So you're kinda supposed to think Batman either escaped and got here or Hush killed him, as far-fetched as that may sound. When we do go back and see what happened 20 minutes ago, it's a little anticlimactic. After all of this planning, it's the cold air in the room that helps Batman regain his strength and give Hush a headbutt. I guess it's kinda cool that he actually bites down on the jade pendant to pull him in. So it's like his mom is ruining things for him one last time. Once Batman breaks free, Hush takes off running for the mansion to try to trick somebody before it's too late. But Batman lets the other members of the Justice League know where they can find Selina's heart so they can help put it back where it belongs, and also alerts the rest of the Bat family that Hush is on his way. Jumping back to Hush in the mansion, Batman comes crashing in to stop him, saving Alfred. Hush comments that this is an even better location for their final battle, since it'll be in front of Bruce's dead parents. The two of them tumble down into the Batcave, which opens up the freshly healed cuts on his face. As he marvels at the scale and complexity of this base of operations, he makes his way to a first aid kit and begins wrapping his face again. Seeing this warped, demented version of Bruce peering through the loose bandages is an effective and striking look for the character. As Hush hypocritically comments about Batman needing to move on from the death of his parents, we get our final insight into the past. When Tommy got back to his house with Peyton so they could talk things over with his mother, he finds that she just had a meeting with her lawyer to deny him access to the family fortune. Because of the argument they had earlier, she's no longer gonna pay for his medical school and tells him he's kicked out of the house. Now she frames things as him clinging onto her for too long instead of making a life for himself, when it was her who controlled his opportunities and forced him to stay home and take care of her. As things escalate, Peyton chases after the lawyer, drives him off the road, and kills him before he can finalize the paperwork for the choice Tommy's mom made. Then she uses her father's connections to make the body disappear while she heads back to the mansion. Continuing to compare him to Bruce, yet at the same time telling him to be his own man, finally makes Tommy snap. He finally admits to cutting their brakes while striking her and then smothering her with a pillow, all the while throwing an Aristotle quote back at her and telling her to hush. She also ends up cutting his face with her nails, causing him to bleed, which symbolically ties into their current situation in the Batcave. Peyton sees the whole thing but tells him to burn the files so he can inherit all of the money now that she's dead. The two of them come up with a lie for how she died, and now they're both free to be together, with Tommy having the money and med school. I feel like he could have had a pretty cushy life with her, but he ends up quickly cutting things off with her since he didn't want to be held down again after ridding himself of his mom. Peyton was actually a villain a little earlier in Dini's run on Detective Comics, who became the new ventriloquist after the death of the original. From what I understand, the last time she was seen was going over the edge of a boat and drowning, so it's interesting to see how badly both of their lives went after splitting ways. Hush continues to fight off Batman, who starts getting help from Robin, Nightwing, and even their giant robotic dinosaur. Seeing the tides turning against him, he decides to use Batman's helicopter to make an escape. He plans on coming back sometime in the future now that he knows how to get in, but Batman grabs on with him. Hush thinks he has the upper hand, but notices that Batman removed his cape. Then realizes his bandages are getting spun up in the copter's blades. This causes him to crash into the wall of the Batcave, with his body washing away in the river below. With Hush taken care of, everyone rushes to save Selina's life, Bruce confesses his love for her, and then 2 months pass. Even though everyone assumes Hush died, Selina still records a final message for him. After everything he put her through, she decided to get back at him by using all of her contacts to steal every bit of the remaining Elliot family fortune. She states she gave the remaining $60 million to charity, while we pull out to see Hush, now in crutches, destroying the tape in anger and fading away into the night. Now poor, alongside being alone as he always has been. That's the end of Heart of Hush itself, and overall it succeeds in a lot of what it attempts, by strengthening the character of Hush in several ways, making this feel like a more definitive revenge story than the character's initial attempt. Sure, his backstory is retconned to hell and back, but it was in dire need of fleshing out. Abusive parents are used a lot in writing to make a villain seem more sympathetic, but since Hush's motivations were already tied to his childhood, it only made sense. Plus, the way the backstory is divvied out over time throughout the story made it easier to accept. I also like that this master plan revolves around surgery since Hush is a surgeon, with both the face alterations and the removal of Selina's heart. I do think he pulled off the face swap a little too quickly and easily. He just decides now is the time to do it and pulls it off without issue, when he apparently could have done it at any point in the past, or at least around the time he and Mr. Freeze were making the machines for this plan. And by rushing the operation right before he needed it, he caused a lot of issues, like making the disguise less convincing and having the wounds reopen, which caused him to rebandage his face and led to his demise. I also don't think the final issue is that satisfying a conclusion based on how good the build-up was. I will say one of the highlights are the covers for each issue, using a nice watercolor style and playing with the concept of Hush's bandages for more twisted visuals. From there, Hush's story continues in a small line of stories dubbed overall as Hush Money, which is a great title. It's spread out a little strangely, since the first issue continues in Detective Comics 852, moves into Batman 685, and then spins off into the first 4 issues of a series called Streets of Gotham. All of this takes place after the DC Universe-wide event Final Crisis. And while we're on the topic, Hush makes a small cameo at the end of issue 33 of Countdown to Final Crisis. It's a funny panel recapping the Riddler telling him Batman's secret identity, with the equation of Bruce Wayne plus money and equipment equals Batman. In the middle of Final Crisis, Hush also appears as one of the significant events recapped in Bruce Wayne's life in Batman issue 683. And for some added context, Final Crisis ended with Batman supposedly dying from being struck with Darkseid's Omega beams. But none of that is important to Hush, who's been living in the winter streets of Gotham for months after his plan failed. He regained basic mobility, but decides life isn't worth living so disgraced and without his $200 million fortune. He drags himself back to the bridge where he orchestrated his parents' car crash and first tried to beat Batman, attempting to end his own life by throwing himself into the cold water below. Surprisingly, he's saved by some sailors who think he's actually Bruce Wayne, making him realize his disguise still works against the average citizen. They let him borrow a few dollars, and he promises them a reward if they go to Wayne Tower. Using the money, he cleans himself up and then finds a wealthy widow to try to get some additional cash from. She obviously knows of and wants to get with Bruce Wayne, and Hush uses that to his advantage, manipulating her into thinking they have a burgeoning romance, and then drugging and throwing her over the edge of her yacht in the middle of the Caribbean Ocean, claiming he doesn't want to ruin the resale value of the yacht by leaving any bloodstains. Imagine thinking you fell in love with someone, but they were a psychopathic serial killer wearing that person's face the whole time. You might be able to say Hush's previous devious actions were a means to an end, trying to get at Bruce, who he felt morally justified in killing. This entire stretch setting up the murder of this woman is a truly horrifying concept, which exposes Hush as pure evil to his core. He ends up selling the yacht for $800,000, rebuilding his life by forging IDs and purchasing guns. Taking advantage of Wayne's likeness, he flies to Sydney, Australia, and uses his supposed connections to a local corporation to gift himself 2 million Australian dollars. Outside, he almost gets recognized by an Australian superhero known as the Tasmanian Devil, but manages to get away without issue. He heads to one of Wayne's resorts in Vietnam, but takes off after he starts thinking people are beginning to see through his disguise. Unfortunately, he gets run off the road and kidnapped by the local militia who take him to Catwoman, who is conveniently here too. This seems insanely contrived, but she states she's here to liberate all of these rare animals from being sold. She uses a rhino to torture Hush in a hanging burlap sack until he's bloodied and broken. Obviously, this is her first time being able to get back at him physically after what he did to her. Just like when he was a kid, Hush takes the beatings, plotting his revenge. Commenting that he might scatter her ashes on the beach she used his money to buy a vacation to at the end of Heart of Hush. She decides to use him as a distraction while she frees the animals. Hush will make his escape while everyone hunts him down, thinking he's Bruce Wayne and far more valuable. The plan is successful, but it turns out the two people escorting him out of there are actually Robin and Nightwing. Turns out everything caught up with him, from the Tasmanian Devil reporting a sighting of Bruce Wayne, to the sailors who saved him asking for a reward like he told them to. They end up knocking him out and taking him to his own cell kept at the top of Wayne Tower under heavy surveillance. Now that he looks like Bruce, they can't risk him running around freely and talking to any other villains in Arkham. He decides to bide his time as the compliant prisoner until the day they drop their guard. Moving into streets of Gotham, we're now in an era where Nightwing is Batman and Damian Wayne is his Robin. Some time has passed and Damian plays chess with the man who has his father's face, while both of them play mind games too. They're interrupted by the news of a recent series of spontaneous combustions killing people all over Gotham. This is a new plot by the villain Firefly, who's been leaving these tiny explosives on people all over the city. Hush finds a way to spin this to his benefit, by lighting a blanket on fire around him to bait Alfred into coming in to save him. They don't know the method behind these fires, so they don't know it isn't possible for Hush to have been affected, since he's been locked up the whole time. Once Alfred is in the cell, Hush breaks the charade and attacks him, locking him in behind him. He then runs off, but suddenly resurfaces, giving a press conference to everyone's surprise. He shows himself to be a master manipulator, as he plays the part of Bruce donating $1 billion of the Wayne fortune to help the city recover from these attacks. All the while, no one can stop him, at risk of causing a scene and exposing the real Bruce is dead and missing at the same time as Batman. If he can't get to Bruce physically anymore, he'll blow through his resources to cripple his legacy. The city loves him as he begins reopening factories and donating to orphanages, making it even harder for the Bat family to stop him. He got his wealth stolen by Selina, so now he's turning it back on everyone, using the face he conveniently made for himself. Eventually, they catch him alone in an elevator and blow him out the side and snatch him up. They actually make the call to let him continue being Bruce Wayne because the people need a symbol to inspire hope. Except moving forward, they're gonna be watching him much closer. He decides to buy the Elliott family estate, which he lost when Selina took everything from him. But when he returns to his true home, he finds the Bat family and Justice League waiting for him. They make it clear he won't be allowed to do anything without being escorted by a member of the Justice League in disguise, making sure he doesn't try to pull anything suspicious. Even though he appears to be free, from now on it's like he's a prisoner all over again, alongside being a puppet. That's legitimately where this whole Hush Money arc ends, but interestingly, there was an entire era of the comics around 2009 where any appearance of Bruce Wayne was secretly Hush. For example, in Gotham City Sirens, a series once again written by Dini about Catwoman, Harley Quinn, and Poison Ivy teaming up, we see this version of Hush getting kidnapped and saved by Harley before he aggressively takes her on a date with the plan of killing her. It's played for laughs as Harley thinks he's in love with her, but in his head, he's thinking of ways to murder her. Joker shows up annoyed that Harley is dating someone else, and Hush makes the decision to shoot down his blimp with a Tommy gun instead of killing the three sirens when he has the chance, knowing it'll make him seem like even more of a hero and keep him out of trouble. I'm impressed they kept something like this going over different comics, but since this was also Dini's pen, I guess it shouldn't be a surprise he'd keep those ideas going. It's the same reason in issue 10 that we see a flashback to a moment like Hush killing Dr. Aesop from Heart of Hush. In Batman and Robin number 18, Hush had a failed date with a woman who went on to get shot in the head and become a villain named the Absence. In Gotham Gazette, Batman Dead, we see reporter Vicky Vale going through his vacation photos as his voicemail claims he's too busy to get a hold of. Tim Drake went from Robin to rebranding himself as Red Robin, and in his own series, Hush appears a few times. But in issue number 6, we see him ask Vicky out on a date to stop her from snooping around. In issue number 9, we see that date and he finds a way to avoid all of her questions. In the subsequent 3 issues, Ra's al Ghul comes to Hush seeing right through his disguise, and demands he gives him Wayne's fortune. Hush has no problems with this, since he'd love to see Bruce's money fall into the hands of his enemies. But before that could happen, it's revealed that the fortune was signed over to Tim Drake earlier, negating their whole plan. In Bruce Wayne: The Road Home, Hush and Vicky continue to date and finally kiss. But she can tell he isn't the real Bruce due to his change in personality. She was already suspicious of Bruce being Batman, but now she wants to know who this imposter is and begins investigating. In Batman 693 and 694, we learn Hush has been invited to join the Gotham Shield Committee, meant to benefit the future of the city. At a party, he tells the Riddler to get lost, who at this point has lost his memory, now working as a private investigator. I can't tell if Hush is still holding his weird grudge against the Riddler from Gotham Knight, or is just trying not to blow his cover. Hush has been aggressively donating to Arkham Asylum, which is being rebuilt into a state-of-the-art facility. His goal is likely to get inside knowledge on its security systems to help him escape easier in the future. These events actually overlap with a mini-series called Arkham Reborn, where we get to see these moments from a different perspective. It's really fun to see how all of these different artists attached to different series chose to draw this version of Bruce to differentiate him from the real one. But those are all of the miscellaneous appearances I could find of Hush from this small era of the storyline. Things come to a conclusion with one final arc Paul Dini wrote for Hush during his run. Starting back in Streets of Gotham number 13, Hush has been cutting valuable departments of Wayne Enterprises. He's becoming more of a nuisance, making them dial back what little actual control he has over his life. At the same time, we learn about a mobster named Pierce who just got out of prison after 37 years, and still holds a grudge against Bruce Wayne, claiming he's gonna put a bullet in his head as soon as he can. Hush fantasizes about murdering all of the members of the Justice League who've been breathing down his neck for an insufferably long time now. He hates his role as Bruce Wayne, since he can't get back at his archenemy physically or symbolically. He even says a big part of him wishes they'd just kill him so his death would at least stain their consciences. Funnily, he points out how he had to change his face physically, yet all of his captors are using magic to change their appearances instantly. Here, he says it took him months, but again, I don't think it was conveyed that way in Heart of Hush. Ever since he bought back his family mansion, he's had time to go through old family letters and diary entries, which lead us into flashbacks detailing his family's history, and what led to the long-standing grudge from the mobster Pierce. This is all before Bruce's parents, Martha and Thomas, got married, and Hush's mom didn't like Martha coming around since her family recently lost a lot of its wealth. She wants the Elliott family to invest in a clinic she's involved with for displaced children. They aren't interested in helping people like that, and Zatanna's father, Zatara, ruins the mood further by performing a magic trick that spawns Thomas Wayne into the room with them. He's been drinking with a couple of women and throws up, disgusting Martha and making her leave. We learn Pierce's vendetta wasn't originally against Bruce Wayne, but his parents. But now that they're dead, he'll need to settle for the next of kin. In the past, Pierce was dead set on buying and then selling the land that clinic was on for a fortune, but Martha refused to give it up to them. They sent some of their men to shoot up the place, but the attempt was thwarted by Alfred after Thomas came to visit Martha to apologize for the night he was drunk. And from then on, the two of them got closer, as Thomas showed up more frequently to help the clinic with any surgical needs they had. Back to reality, Hush is hoping to cause chaos using Bruce's good name to propose the release of killers in Arkham before they've been reformed. This week, he wants to release someone named Jane Doe, a skinless serial killer who skins her victims and wears their skin as her own, assuming their personality reality perfectly. Hush trying to advocate for her release captures her interest, and she wants to figure out why he'd do this for her. He isn't able to convince them to release her, so he goes back to scheming. He has to go to another party, and this time Zatanna is his date and overseer for the night, which causes him to once again think back to how much he disliked her hanging around ever since he was a child. When they get news that Jane Doe has taken the skin of a security guard and used it to escape Arkham, they start taking Hush back home, since this is something they all need to deal with. But on the way there, a car crashes into them, knocking Alfred out. It's Pierce and his gang, who shoot Hush as soon as he steps out of the vehicle, thinking he's Bruce. If you inherit his likeness, you're gonna inherit those who hate him. Pierce is infamous enough that Hush still remembers stories about him from when he was a kid. Apparently, he was the cause of much of his parents' arguing, drinking, as well as the abuse he received. He finds himself captured in some kind of makeshift cell, and believing they're talking to Bruce, they explain their justification for hating him. Hush reveals that while they were yapping, he unlocked his cuffs and proceeds to swiftly disarm and take out every one of them. In the middle of their shock, he tells them to look closer at the scars on his face, revealing he isn't actually Bruce Wayne. Thankfully, Pierce found the one man who hates the Wayne family more than him. Turns out, back in the day, Pierce tried teaming up with the man who would eventually become known as the villain Dr. Death. He was tasked with creating an effective contagion that could be spread using the local rat population. When a kid spots them in the middle of releasing one of these infected rats, they force it to bite him and drop him off at the clinic. Using all the resources available, Thomas Wayne and his team are able to stabilize the kid and prevent the attempted outbreak. Panicking, the gangsters decide to burn the whole place down as a last-ditch effort, but the fires are held back by what I believe to be the newly formed Justice Society of America, which included Zatanna's father, Zatara. In the chaos, Hush's father even grew a conscience, and tried to stop the criminals from escaping, but Pierce ended up shooting him. He survived and went to the police, which got Pierce sent to prison for those 37 years. Standing up to them probably also resulted in these gangsters pulling strings behind the scenes to damage the Elliott family's pharmaceutical business, which could be seen as a major cause for the arguing, drinking, and abuse Hush felt the brunt of as a kid. Pierce would have every reason to hate Hush as much as he hates Bruce, given how he's taking his anger out on the next generation, but he isn't actually aware who Hush is. It's good to see him back in his normal costume at this point. The two of them decide to rope Dr. Death back in on things, evading the toxic traps in his lair by bringing air filters. Once again, Hush refers to holding a grudge against the Joker, calling back to the mess that was the Gotham Knights era of the character. Part of the reason he's gonna enjoy killing Bruce is watching the Joker lose his reason for living once Batman dies too. But how are they gonna kill Bruce if Hush knows Bruce is dead? Well, it turns out at this point, the real Bruce Wayne and Batman have returned to the world. Though characters believe Batman was killed at the end of Final Crisis, he was actually sent back in time and managed to find a way to get back in his own miniseries. Once he got all of that straightened out, he decided to hold a press conference as himself, where instead of announcing he was Batman, he claims to have been funding Batman's activities for years. This leads into his plans to franchise out the concept of Batman, detailed in a series called Batman Incorporated, so every part of the world could have a hero of their own stopping crime. This, of course, rids the Bat family of their need for Hush as Bruce Wayne's body double, but his disguise still works to deceive any low-ranking employees of Wayne Enterprises. They force Dr. Death to provide them with some potent toxins to pump into the airways of Wayne Tower, intending to kill everyone there. Hush poses as a Bruce Wayne who needs help getting into his office, and tricks a guy named Jeff who has access into letting him and the others into the building. They knock him out and take him with them as a hostage. As Dr. Death is rigging up his toxins, we learn from his inner monologue that he's setting things up to kill Hush and Pierce as well. Hush is smart enough not to trust a guy who names himself after Death, so he incapacitates him and takes over setting up the chemicals. He betrays Pierce for good measure, shooting him before revealing he's the son of the Elliott whose testimony put him in prison. Hush is satisfied knowing he's getting payback for what role Pierce could have had in making his childhood even more miserable. As he makes his escape, he sees the other mobsters they brought are knocked out, and their hostage, Jeff, is gone. At first, you're thinking Batman or someone related to him has arrived. since this is one of his home bases after all. Instead, Jeff jumps out of cover, knocking him out using a fire extinguisher. When he wakes up, he's tied up and his face is burning, only for it to be revealed that Jeff has been the serial killer Jane Doe this whole time. She had escaped earlier in the story and killed the original Jeff, using his skin to get closer to and learning more about the man she thought was Bruce Wayne. All this because Hush had tried to cause trouble by vouching for her release from Arkham earlier in the story. Turns out she sliced his entire face off, and plans to wear it to make her escape from the building. As she adheres it to her own skinless face, she comments how surprised she is that he's had so much plastic surgery, not knowing that's because this face didn't start off looking like Bruce's. Batman actually arrives in the middle of Hush getting his neck slit to save his life, which Hush still has the nerve to scoff at. Seeing Hush's altered Bruce Wayne face fighting Batman because it was taken by another serial killer is quite the convoluted concept. Either way, the entire situation is diffused, with only Dr. Death escaping after permanently disfiguring Pierce with a chemical explosion that somehow enhances his physical strength by the time he's in prison. Meanwhile, Hush ends up back in Arkham, which might be the first time he's officially sent there, outside of that one time he agreed to stay there for a night to get that Peacemaker removed from his body. The now faceless Hush is trying to use what little leverage he has by exposing Batman's identity, but no one believes or cares anymore now that the announcement was made that Bruce is Batman's financier. We're left with Hush attacking his doctor, lamenting on the idea that Thomas Elliot is now nothing more than a broken shell, and the shadow of another man. He's lost all sense of identity both mentally and now physically, calling himself a faint whisper amongst the screams in Arkham, which gives the name Hush more significance. The final shot of the comic calls Arkham Asylum the titular House of Hush, and I was actually wondering what the title was going for there. Obviously Heart of Hush and Hush Money make perfect sense, but this one is more ill-defined as a concept. Perhaps we're meant to draw a through line from the Elliot mansion he lives in at the start to Arkham, where his choices have landed him. It's a fitting end for Hush, who surgically altered himself to live someone else's identity, to be skinned by another villain who takes the idea of living in someone else's skin more literally. He chased after Bruce's identity his whole life, so to witness someone stealing that same identity off of him must have been deeply chilling. I can't think of anything else to do with the idea of Hush and faces beyond this point, outside maybe trying to get Bruce's actual face for himself. It's a good ending, but the majority of this arc's runtime isn't that compelling, and doesn't feel like it's headed in a determinate direction. None of the flashbacks here are as interesting as the stuff in Heart of Hush, at least when it comes to shedding light on Hush as a character, since most of it focuses around Bruce's parents and why these mobsters hate them. Hush gets caught in the crossfire and turns things around to his benefit, but poisoning Wayne Tower is kind of lame as a final plan. I just expect something a little more inspired from him at this point. I wonder if Dini had to change his plans for the story to line up with Batman's return from his time-traveling escapade. One last note would be that I don't dislike Dustin Nguyen's art style, but I do find it hard to tell certain characters apart, especially in these flashbacks. I'm not sure if it helps or hurts a story about a guy looking like someone else when the faces are vague enough that you can't really tell the difference between the knockoff and the real deal. As I mentioned at the beginning of this whole video, Paul Dini was the lead writer for the first two Arkham games, Asylum and City. In the first one, Hush only gets a nod as one of the villain bios you can unlock, which just reiterates his comic book backstory along with an original piece of art. But he had a pretty great side mission revolving around him in Arkham City. His first appearance here may seem innocuous until it's paid off later in the game. You find him lying in a bed with his head wrapped up, holding onto a medical cooler. The medic taking care of him states that he was actually a doctor assigned there, who lost his mind and began stealing medical supplies before he cut off his own face. They found him laughing in a corner bleeding, and none of them know what's in the box. After that bizarre sight, you start finding murder victims who've had their faces removed with bandages wrapped around their heads. The press starts calling this killer the identity thief, but witnesses tell Batman the killer looked like Bruce Wayne. You even end up finding Bruce's fingerprints on one of the murder weapons, which could either be a setup or the result of some form of mind control from one of the many villains in the city. Eventually, you find his hideout, and he traps Batman inside before making his appearance. He He slowly unwraps his head, revealing that he used 6 specifically chosen victims to reconstruct his face to match Bruce Wayne's, like picking the perfect jigsaw puzzle pieces. Expressing hatred for Bruce but seemingly unaware that Batman is Bruce, he leaves him there and escapes Arkham City, setting up for a sequel. Bruce remembers him from his childhood, but doesn't know what inspired this revenge scheme, making it clear that this is the first time he's meeting Hush as a villain. This makes the bio in Asylum obsolete, but that's such a small element of that game's story, and I'd much rather have this and the potential for something greater it brings. I like that when given the opportunity to start Hush's journey from the beginning, Dini chose to make the face alteration idea the premise of his character, which I think is far more iconic. Back when this game first came out, this was my first real introduction to Hush. So when I went back and read the comics and saw that he never changed his face or even removed his bandages at the end of the original Hush storyline, I was really surprised. The Arkham games actually got several tie-in comics across their run, and Hush kinda gets an origin story in the pages of Arkham Unhinged. He makes a small cameo in the background of issue 10 with his head bandaged. But in issue 12, we see a flashback where Thomas Elliot is kidnapped by the Joker and paid to cut these conjoined twins in half. These are 2 enemies you fight in the actual game, so I guess it's interesting to learn that they were connected to Hush. We see Thomas is reveling in the surgery, showing that he was already out of his mind. And it's interesting to see an early version of the character who's overtly insane, unlike the version we saw in the original comic who was playing the part of a totally stable best friend. He uses the money to fund his upcoming plastic surgery and get himself a nice costume. Now, I've read many claims from people stating that Paul Dini actually intended for Hush and Scarecrow to be the main antagonists of the sequel, Arkham Knight, but I can't find any proof of this from his mouth. So as cool as that sounds, I'm just gonna strike it down as misinformation being passed around, because a lot of people didn't end up liking Knight's story and want to believe in a better alternative. In truth, Dini never worked on Knight at all, and as a freelance writer was told to find other work, as the team at Rocksteady decided to use their own internal writers for the end of the trilogy. I was more of a fan of how self-contained Asylum was as a story, and wasn't too drawn in by how much Knight revolved around the greater Batman mythos, like with the return of Jason Todd. Hush does have another side mission in Knight, but it doesn't really live up to the build-up from City. Batman gets an alert from Wayne Tower, and when we go to check it out, we get a nicely done fake-out. The way it's cut makes it appear as though Batman switches to his civilian attire while in the elevator on the way up. But really, we're looking at Hush from a bit earlier, finally using his reconstructed face to infiltrate Bruce's office. He's immediately denied access by a retinal scan, but by taking one of Wayne's top executives, Lucius Fox, hostage, he's able to bypass that barrier. He starts transferring all of Wayne's funds over to his account, which is depicted with a very on-the-nose interface. You go in there to stop him, and it's basically a repeat of the revelation from the end of the original Hush comic, except tied into his new appearance, which was only done later in Heart of Hush. He explains why he hates Bruce so much, but this time Batman takes off his mask to one-up him with his identity. This shocks Hush, and you need to disarm him before he shoots Lucius. Acting too early or too late can get either one of you shot, but if you time it correctly, you both team up to stun and slam dunk Hush into the office table. Something about the way Batman is already turned around after completely demolishing this man is so funny to me. Even funnier was that the first time I played this mission, it glitched up, and instead of Batman removing his cowl, it stayed on his head while his hair rendered in sticking out the top. So the whole time I had to imagine what was actually happening in the story with his face reveal. I also like how Hush reacts to getting his face damaged, since it's his prized possession. One of the coolest elements about Hush in these games is that he's voiced by Kevin Conroy, just like Batman. He gets to do a much creepier voice, which sells the dark reflection element of the character much more. This couldn't be done in the comics for obvious reasons, but it also helps that we never hear Hush speak before he made this transformation. So to us, he's always been this unhinged clone. This side mission wraps his storyline up way too easily, which is a bit disappointing. I do think there are some clever aspects to the way it's presented, but it seemed both the comics and the games struggled to come up with a significant enough plan to use his altered face for once he had it. It's also strange that Hush had that entire H-branded costume made for himself in City, only to never appear with it again. Well, at least in the game, since he makes a cameo in the outfit in Batman Arkham Knight issue 39, alongside the other villains in this universe. And lastly, in a prequel comic to the game, Arkham Knight Genesis #1, we get to see more of what Hush was up to after he escaped In City. In the very first page, he's getting eaten alive by rats under the control of a villain named Ratcatcher, who's angry after finding out he isn't really Bruce. He's saved by the Arkham Knight, who is this universe's version of Jason Todd/Red Hood, and he takes him back to his hidden lair. Jason gets Hush fresh bandages and helps him stitch his face back up after getting mauled by rats. He even gives him some healing paste made from Clayface DNA to rub on his scars to heal them quickly, which seems like an unnecessary addition. But I guess it's nice to know Hush had interactions with the game's titular antagonist, so his role feels a bit more significant. Moving away from the Arkham universe and back to the comics, we have a couple miscellaneous stories including the character to cover for the sake of completion. I figured we could end this trilogy of Hush videos on a clean note by taking a look at everything before the New 52, which for those unaware was when DC decided to reboot their entire universe with the conclusion of the event Flashpoint in 2011. With that, Batman's continuity got heavily compressed, and it's unclear which events in his history still happened, including a lot of the stuff I've covered in these Hush videos. This reboot would eventually be undone to a large degree in 2016 due to poor reception, with an initiative called DC Rebirth. Since it was a blend of the previous two continuities, and I'm not familiar enough with comics to discern what was and wasn't considered canon, I find this to be even more confusing. We'll get to that stuff in the future, but for now, let's keep things consistent with our look at works by Paul Dini by covering a comic miniseries based on Batman Beyond from 2010. Dini is one of the creators and lead writers on the animated series this is a continuation of, but he isn't actually involved in this comic storyline itself. The show was a sequel to the original Batman the Animated Series, set in a technologically advanced future where an elderly Batman passes the torch to a younger guy named Terry McGinnis. This miniseries focuses entirely on a storyline titled Beyond Hush, which has their own take on the character. Just like in the original comic continuity, Hush had the same dynamic as one of Batman's villains in the past, but he ended up getting shot and pronounced dead when he tried to make his escape after one of his schemes went south. Now, decades later, a new villain has appeared, killing Batman's old enemies in ways that frame his other enemies. He told a victim to hush before he tried to kill them, so the press started calling him that. But Bruce isn't sure how it's possible for it to really be the original. Turns out he's actually an escaped clone of Dick Grayson, who's obsessed with reclaiming his right to inherit the mantle of Batman by killing villains to protect Gotham. So he's kinda like a repeat of Red Hood mixed with an even greater inferiority complex. He was designed by the granddaughter of the real Hush who wanted to do good in the world, but had her work twisted by Amanda Waller, who runs the genetic research facility she worked at. I guess this means Hush not only fucks in this universe, but also really did just die from a random woman shooting him. They still call this clone of Grayson Hush even after they learn he isn't related to him. He eventually decides to destroy Gotham using explosives to trigger an earthquake, believing that the only way to end crime is to wipe out the entire city. This forces the real grizzled Dick Grayson to come out of retirement to stop his younger clone. They all kick this wannabe Hush's ass and accidentally drop him down a well with a robot where he explodes and dies. At the end, they reveal Waller has created countless other clones of either Grayson or Bruce, stating that Gotham will always need a Batman. It's kinda lame that they pivoted a Hush story into being about a clone of a previous Robin, but the real Hush would have been too old to do the things this guy was doing. It would have to be a totally different story about an old guy getting his last attempt at revenge if they really wanted to include him. Either that, or they could have found some way to justify this clone also having the memories of Hush, which resulted in him having such a vendetta. I kinda feel like I was baited into reading this because they used the Hush name to market the story, but it wasn't bad. If you're a fan of the original animated series this follows up on, let me know how well some of the fan service is handled here, since from what I understand this is the first appearance of Dick Grayson, as well as a version of Catwoman in the Batman Beyond era of the timeline. The last story I want to talk about today is a mini-series called Gates of Gotham from 2011, right before the New 52 relaunch. I mentioned the whole Batman Incorporated concept earlier, and this actually takes place during that era, so Dick Grayson is actually the Batman of Gotham. This is notable for being one of the first Batman storylines with Scott Snyder as one of the writers. He'd soon go on to make waves as the main writer behind the Court of Owls arc, which kicked off the New 52 version of the character. The plot revolves around the destruction of significant landmarks around Gotham, which all tie back to the three wealthy families which helped turn Gotham into the sprawling cityscape it is today. Those would be the Waynes, Elliots, and Cobblepots. And back in the day, they ended up scorning two talented architects who were the key to the city's development. Their last names were Gates, and when one of the brothers died in a mysterious underwater accident, the other was convinced it was intentional sabotage from the wealthy families, writing about his desire for revenge in a journal that eventually inspired one of his descendants to take action, using the same kind of diving suit from the 1800s to enhance his strength and conceal his identity. This descendant became known as the Architect. He breaks Hush out of Arkham Asylum and requests his help, and since the plan involves destroying the legacy of the Waynes, he accepts. I'm gonna assume this actually picks up from where House of Hush left off, explaining why he's in Arkham. Hush is the grimiest he's ever been in the series, so I wonder if he's really still missing his face under there. The art style is abstract enough that it's hard to tell one way or the other. He's drawn with a really intense grin throughout this series, which is kind of a cool look for him. We learn a bit more about the Elliot family beyond how much Hush hated his parents. Apparently, they founded the Gotham Herald in the early days, and because of that, they own the original city plans that the architect wants for his attacks. Hush tells him where these blueprints are kept, but warns him that he'll kill him if he tries to kill any of the Waynes, since that's his right alone. This gets him smacked across the back of the head and placed in Wayne Tower with a bomb strapped to his chest. This countdown will accelerate if it's removed, meaning Batman only has time to save Hush or the building. Hush actually finds this all amusing, because he'll either get to see the Wayne family lose a landmark, or die knowing the guilt would eat away at Batman. He chooses to save Hush, but the countdown is hooked up to another bomb in the Penguin's Iceberg Lounge, so that when he cuts Hush free, it explodes both locations. Hush laughs at their failure and calls out their ignorance of the history of Gotham. The architect's message to the police claims that the families would fall by the gates of Gotham, and Hush gives Batman the hint that the gates aren't locations but people, referring to the two brothers named Gates. This is all before he receives another thorough beating and gets placed back in Arkham. This is a small appearance from Hush, but I like that he stands his ground as the only one allowed to kill Bruce Wayne, even while wearing a straitjacket in the face of this new enemy. Technically, his help leads to the architect being stopped before he can flood Gotham by blowing up a seawall. And just to tie a bow on this plotline, just know that there was no conspiracy to kill one of the two original Gates brothers, but the other was just driven insane from the constant use of the diving suit, the same insanity that was eventually experienced by the architect himself. One final thing from a month before the New 52 launched was a collection of stories called Batman 80-Page Giant 2011. And in the first story, we get to see Hush making a cameo alongside some of the other most iconic villains in the series. There was a lighthearted comedic series called Little Gotham, which came out after the New 52, but this feels like the best place to mention it since the art was also done by Dustin Nguyen, who even wrote it too. Hush appears throughout it in some charming places alongside other characters from the Heart of Hush era of the comics, which had me feeling at home. This watercolor, super deformed look actually works really well, and the premise kinda reminds me of something like Chibi Chara Go Nagai World. I like this look much more than a similarly tiny version of Hush that appears in issue 51 and 52 of Superman Batman. This is a two-parter where the normal world crosses over with one where everyone's a toddler. It's funny, but their faces kinda creep me out, and this version of Hush really doesn't do anything. Now, even though the universe was rebooted a few times, that didn't stop Hush from continuing to appear as a significant opponent for Batman. He plays a big role in various storylines within series like Batman Eternal, All-Star Batman, and of course the sequel to his original appearance, Hush 2 from 2025. I haven't dug into these myself, but I plan to, so the potential for a few more videos on Hush in the future is there, especially if you guys enjoyed this trilogy taking a look at him. Of course, the main event for this video was the Paul Dini run, but it's always interesting to see how a character can be reinterpreted by different writers and artists. In my mind, the ideal form of Hush would take the original story, and from the beginning mix it with the backstory and motivations established in Heart of Hush, but do the facial reconstruction element more like it was done in Arkham City, making his new identity a stitched-together collection of various pieces taken from his victims. In the first issue of Hush 2, we see him using some sort of metal tool to force the Joker's mouth open, and I'd like to see him kill in more unique ways like this, almost like he's Batman's Jigsaw rather than just shooting two pistols. This is a character who intrigued me with his design and the eye-catching art in his debut comic. He had a lot of potential even though that wasn't originally fulfilled, but it's fascinating to see him fleshed out more and more over time, as these new layers to his character have been drip-fed to us over the years. Definitely give the original story alongside Heart of Hush a read if you haven't. And I'll keep you posted if I discover anything else noteworthy regarding this character, whether it's legitimately great or just really funny.